We're so excited to have Alice from EF from Entrepreneurs First. Today, the topic for this event is what EF wants to see in founders at day zero. I'm going to be moderating the event. My name is Gul. I'm the founder CEO at Metal. Before starting Metal, I raised 120 million across 6 venture rounds for my first startup, and it was part of the early team at DoorDash and Marqeta before that. Um, uh, as everyone knows on this call, and for people who are joining us for the first time, Metal is an AI native operating system for founders that are raising venture rounds that's becoming the industry standard for how founders go out to raise capital. Today, we have here Alice with us, who's the co-founder and CEO of Entrepreneurs First, also known as EF. Over the past decade, EF has had tremendous success. They've invested in more than 500 companies, now collectively valued at more than $16 billion. As the CEO of EF, Alice has pioneered talent investing as a new category that I'm really excited to learn more about. Before that, she co-founded Code First Schools and co-authored How to Be a Founder. She's the winner of the 2023 Best Startup Book of the Year award. Alice, we'd love to take a moment to have you introduce yourself to the audience in your own words. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. Um, what can I add on top of that? That felt like a very comprehensive introduction. Yeah, I feel like in many ways I have the best job in the world that I get to spend time with founders at the very beginning of the company creation process. And then also we're lucky enough that our investors in EF itself are some of the best founders in the world. People like Patrick and John Collison, founders of Stripe, or Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, or Eric Schmidt from Google. And so I think I find real joy in, what can you see in the behaviors and traits of some of the world's best founders, and then how does that translate to the founders that I get to work with on a day-to-day basis. So I'm the CEO of the company, and we have a team of about 100 people across 3 continents. So I spend a bunch of my time running the company, but I still spend a lot of my time working with founders every day.
Oh gosh, I think
We
it
have some
has
tech issues.
yeah, I think we have some tech issues from consent. So maybe I can jump in Go's place. So hi everyone, I lead marketing at Metal and I'm just gonna be jumping in the meantime so we can just like get things going. Alice, I actually have a very interesting question for you and for context, I have always, followed EF for quite some time. And I was looking up EF. I noticed that you guys started in 2011 with Matt Clifford. And at that time, the standard pre-seed thesis was that you back the idea and then you think about the team, right? Now, EF thesis is completely different. You back the founder first, and it's a very new category in talent investing. So, what data or were there any specific experiences that convinced you that everyone who had the pre-seed thesis was that they had it backwards? So, just like super curious about that.
I mean, I think to be clear, when we started, there wasn't a pre-seed thesis. So we started investing in 2015, and even then, accelerators were still a reasonably new category. And the idea of investing in an individual before they have, investing in an individual with an idea was still seen as pretty unusual. And it's kind of hard to imagine that now because the market has shifted and matured so much. I mean, when we first started EF, I suppose we did what all founders should do, which is we went and spoke to our customers. And we went out at the time to a bunch of the UK's best universities and asked people whether they wanted to found companies and what was stopping them. And the point that came up time and time again is I would love to be a founder, but I have a bunch of ideas. I'm not sure which one to pick, and I don't know who to work with. Every time I find somebody who wants to be a co-founder, then get a job at Google or McKinsey or Jane Street, and then dump me and leave me in the lurch. And the very early idea for EF was, okay, well, we'll just solve our customers' problems. They want to build companies, they want to be founders, but there wasn't a dense enough ecosystem that could teach them what good ideas look like or help them develop ideas, nor was there a dense enough talent ecosystem of people who genuinely were ready to found right then. So when we spoke to VCs in the early days of EF, the message again and again was like, do not do this. This is not how it works. You cannot turn strangers into co-founders. You cannot turn strangers into startups. But now, almost $20 billion worth of companies later, I think we have proven that this contrarian thesis does work.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Alice, and thank you so much for taking up. Just for everyone in the room, I'm actually in the middle of a thunderstorm, and so as power, if there's outages again, Samir will take over as a moderator. Alice, would love to just build on exactly what you were mentioning. Are there when it comes to talent investing, right? Like this is fundamentally different from how early stage venture works today, right? Like venture decisions are being made with one or two calls at pre-seed, right? Maybe a few more calls at seed and so on and so forth. And so I guess are there specific advantages for founders to engage in a program that is a bit more fleshed out, where decisions are being made based on a set of data points that's a bit different from one or two calls? I guess from the founder experience, right? Like, what is talent investing? Like, what are there parts of it that are more appealing to founders based on the feedback you receive from founders that have participated in the programs?
So our definition of talent investing would be investing in the individual rather than investing in the idea, and it's typically investing before there even is an idea. Now, in some ways, you could say this is just very early angel investing. The bit that we do differently is that we have a whole product that enables individuals to go very quickly from -1 to the point where they have a seed funded startup. We are big believers in the power of carefully screened and selected cohorts. So when you join EF, you end up joining a group of normally around 50 individuals who are all screened for their founder potential, come from thousands and thousands of applications, and who are ready to go right now and have given up a bunch of other stuff in their life to be fully committed to founding right now. That group of individuals then goes through a 8-week process of finding a co-founder. And most people find a co-founder from within that group. I think one of the things that people are always surprised by is like how quickly you can build a very strong relationship with somebody that you only met a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things I always get excited by is the ideas that come out of that as well. All of your ideas at the moment are constrained by what you know, we call it your edge, your experiences, the things that you know about in life. The great thing about meeting and experimenting with different co-founders is it explodes the universe of different ideas that you can work on. That intersectionality when two people's edges come together is where some of the most interesting ideas come from. So at EF, we run a very kind of fully fleshed product experience that takes you from, at the point where you're kind of just beginning to get going, beginning to think about ideas, beginning to think about who you might want to work with, all the way through to raising your seed round. So we now bring all of the founders to San Francisco for 3 months to for fundraising and get to the point where they can raise from some of the world's best investors very quickly.
Awesome. No, I guess just taking one step deeper into that, right? What does that experience like over 3 months or whatever time period look like for founders, right? Like where does it start? And then sort of at what point does fundraising come into the mix? And when founders are getting started, when they get into the program, what does day zero look like? And then what does day, 90 look like? And what happens in between? I think that would be super useful just for our
Sure.
audience of founders that are looking to raise.
So, so the EF experience is pretty intense. It is not about having the time and space to noodle on ideas. It's about rapidly testing and iterating with different co-founders on different ideas. And so for the first 8 weeks, you are in our office every day. We have offices in London, Bangalore, and San Francisco. You're in our office every day. You are working with different co-founders. You're working very closely with my team and with our advisors. And after 8 weeks, the majority of people are in a stable team that they're excited about, working on an idea they're excited about. They spend a couple of weeks working on their ideas, and then they'll go through our investment committee where they have the opportunity to raise $250,000. If they pass the investment committee, and our incentive is for as many of them to pass as possible, they then fly out pretty much immediately to San Francisco and spend a further 3 months there preparing for raising their seed round. We run a demo day in San Francisco every quarter. And 10% of our companies last year were funded by one of Benchmark, Founders Fund, Index, or Khosla. We see the companies get a pretty significant valuation or cap increase by moving to the US. But largely, it's also about accessing the US customer base. So having built companies around the world for the last 10 years, there is something very special about the American market, and how quickly customers move here, how deep their pockets are. And so we now push all of our companies to build first for the American market before they build for other markets.
Right on. It's a super clear. Thanks for that experience. And as I look back to it, when I was getting started, I think something like this would have been transformational. I guess let's switch gears and talk a little bit about founders. And so, since you've done so many of these programs so many different times, what are specific sort of founder, traits or founder characteristics that, enable founders to get the most value out of EF and then over time, get not only get the most value out of the program, but also be successful on this path of being a founder and, raising capital and sort of all the steps that are involved in that journey. What is, to put it succinctly, what does EF look for in founders?
What do we look for in founders? So this is the thing that we are pretty obsessive about, getting the right people in a cohort so that you know that the potential co-founder you are experimenting with is somebody who is of exceptional quality. So there's the kind of basic skill things. We like builders, we like technologists, we like people who are super smart, we like problem solvers. And then there's the kind of probably behavioral things you would expect, such as the sort of person who's always challenged convention, who hasn't followed the status quo, somebody who has a strong drive to achieve and bias to action. And then there's the mindset pieces. And this, in some ways, I think is the hardest bit to uncover through the selection process. But it's how do they think about themselves and how do they think about how they interact with the world? So it's things like pronoia, which is the opposite of paranoia. Paranoia is believing that the world is conspiring against you. Many of the best founders I've worked with have pronoia, where they believe the world is actually conspiring in their favor. This is linked to something that we call personal exceptionalism. We're like individuals who have high personal exceptionalism, where they believe that their odds of success are greater than everyone else's. We like megalomaniacs. We like people who have a drive and desire for power. And it's not always a socially acceptable thing to say that you aspire to power, but the way that you often see it being talked about is by talking about impact. I want to have impact, but what does that mean? What does it mean to want to impact millions of people's lives? It's often that there is some sort of power driver there. None of these things are, sufficient to succeed. Being a megalomaniac who believes that they have a higher chance of success than everyone else is not sufficient, but it is necessary. There's something about constantly designing and thinking and problem solving for success rather than for failure. I've worked with a bunch of very talented, smart, fantastic builders and creators who 10% of them, 20% of their brain was dedicated to not failing. As soon as you start preparing not to fail, you actually start preparing to fail because your brain isn't fully committed to the idea of success. So yeah, none of those things are sufficient to succeed, but they are a necessary baseline.
Awesome. This is really, really useful. And I think, it's fairly different from, a lot of the ongoing sort of narratives in venture today in terms of, venture investments and founder backgrounds and all of that. One thing I did not hear, Alice, in your response is sort of pedigree or having worked in certain types of work environments, right? Or sort of backgrounds. I think you're leaning directly into behavioral tendencies and characteristics and inclinations and mindset, which is terrific. And so just, want to call out that observation. Awesome. I guess, just switching gears again, coming back to sort of what happens after the program. Uh, so there's like that side of like founders, you do that selection process. There's like, thousands of applications, you review that. There's a very special cohort of like, 50 people that you bring together across an 8-week program. And then, a subset of that flies out to San Francisco to go out and raise a seed round. And then about 10% of the cohort is raising their rounds from top tier investors like Benchmark, like, some of the other names you mentioned. I guess, what does that sort of experience for founders look like when it comes to fundraising? It's pretty similar to like Y Combinator or other top tier accelerators, or
Yeah.
is that
So
different?
the process that we use, which I think is slightly different to others, is that we are uh, focusing on trying to get every company a lead investor.
Mm.
So most of them will still will raise on safes, but the process we use is we have a demo day where we have about 250 investors come and watch the company's pitch, and then usually within the 2 weeks post demo day, we do all of our fundraising post demo day rather than pre demo day. We do that because it creates it increases the competition basically. We don't want any one investor to get access to you first. And this is, if you're raising outside of a accelerator, I would encourage you to think about how to create your own structure that engenders competition. So you want you want to meet everyone within a 2 week period, so that everyone knows that they are basically in a competitive process. And we have a strong preference that our companies end up with a lead investor who is taking the majority of the round. Now, why do we care about that? Many of our founders are immigrants coming to the US and moving to the US for the first time. By having a lead investor, you have somebody who genuinely cares, who hopefully have put in enough capital that it is a significant sum of money for them. It's a meaningful contribution for them, and that they're then going to lean into providing support. Now, most founders always overestimate the amount of support they will get from their VCs. Really, the support that you want is help raising your Series A, getting the connections and introductions to make that Series A fundraise as easy as possible. Every round you raise typically gets harder. There's a smaller number of investors for each round, and the bar gets higher and higher. So we typically see founders raising anywhere, within 3 days post demo day to 3 weeks. They raise anywhere from 2 million up to 15 million, and on caps anywhere from 20 up to 75. And these are companies that are really only 3 months old at the point where they're raising, and that is partly the power of the EF brand, but also the power of running a really really tight process. We do a bunch of coaching with the founders as they go through that process, both in terms of how to communicate with investors, how to run investor meetings. It is a very, very iterative process. You might be doing 12 investor meetings a day. If we can give you feedback on those first, couple of meetings, it can actually set you up for success for the rest of your meetings. Often there's it might be weird ticks that you have when you communicate. It might be that you ramble. It might be that you didn't set the meeting up properly. But just helping catch some of those kind of obvious mistakes early on can really help set founders up for success.
Awesome. Really appreciate the differences between, EF and some of the other accelerators, particularly around like sort of this preference for having a lead investor in the mix. I think that's unique to EF, and I think that's terrific. I guess we have a couple of questions here from the audience we can dive into before we move on. So one of these is like, as an investor, different investors have different mechanisms for evaluating and discerning these different founder traits. What is that mechanism for EF? How does EF go about uncovering and discerning these qualitative founder traits?
So many of the people that we work with on our cohorts are people that we have met and been building a relationship with for somewhere between 6 and 24 months. So we just get to know people. The best way to understand how somebody thinks and how they behave is to get to know them. We also, as part of our kind of official selection process, run usually a build part of the event. So it gives us the opportunity to see how people interact with each other, what their productivity is like. But really, the main thing is if you just talk to somebody enough and really get to know them, and rather than just thinking about interviewing somebody, but actually think about how can I get to know this person so that I can really understand what I can do to unlock them and help them progress. And sometimes the right answer is like, actually, you shouldn't be a founder, and we can introduce you to a startup that's looking to hire, or take a different path. But yeah, it's really, there is no substitute for just genuinely being interested in people and wanting to get to know them. There was a great book by David Brooks called How to Know Someone, which has some really great, if anyone's interested in this as a process, like how to have really interesting, thought-provoking conversations that skip small talk and actually enable you to understand the other person.
Another one from the audience, which is sort of related, but maybe not so related. So in a program like EF, how do we mitigate split risk when you've met someone under high pressure and in a short period of time you decide to partner up with them, and then it turns out to be a decision that was made in haste.
Yeah, I mean, your incentives and our incentives are very strongly aligned. When teams break up, it's really expensive for us, it's really expensive for you. So you may not have built a co-founding team before, and you definitely haven't built a co-founding team through EF. We have done this for 10 years. We know what good teams look like and we know what bad teams look like. So the real kind of secret of the EF team building process is one, carefully composed group of people who've been selected to have certain characteristics in the room altogether. And then you need to set an environment that makes it very easy for people to get into and importantly get out of teams. My team is there to act as the mirror to be like, look, normally for a team of this age and this stage, we would expect for you to be 2, 4, 10 times ahead of where you are. Let's talk about why that's not happening and whether there's any reason why it might be the team that is the issue. We will encourage founders to break up. Most individuals go through about 2.5 teams during that 8-week process, but some people go through 5 or 6 teams.
Awesome. I really like this one. So, with AI dramatically reducing the cost of building products and everything that AI is changing, is there a shift in the landscape in terms of founder characteristics that have become more valuable or some which have become less valuable?
Um, so in the world of this generation of AI, distribution and brand and product thinking have never been more important. There's still so if you think about like the different kinds of risk that a startup can take, technical risk, market risk, execution risk. Um, there are still some companies that are taking real technical risks. So, there are still a bunch of people who are building neo labs, AI infrastructure, and so there, I don't think the skill set has changed significantly. If you think about the kind of AI native services era that we're now heading into, suddenly this kind of go to market, how do you get the full end to end service into people's hands? How do you do that when there are significant incumbents that are already based in those markets? Um, and how do you deliver a product experience that is 10x better and 10x cheaper? 10x cheaper for you to deliver rather than for the customer. So I think it's an interesting era. I think one of the things that we're seeing as well is like a shift in how people think about co-founders and think about the team that they're building very early on. It may be that you can actually build a founding team rather than having a single co-founder. I think it kind of then changes the question of like what is the purpose of a co-founder? A CEO CTO combination previously was like, okay, well, you have somebody who's more in a builder mode and somebody who's more in the kind of like sales and company building mode. And I think it does shift that to say actually everyone can be a builder and creator. I'm still a massive fan of co-founders because building a company is one of the most challenging career paths that you can take. It is emotionally incredibly hard. And there is still immense kind of beauty and resilience that it comes from having a co-founder. And honestly, joy. I've had a co-founder for the last 15 years, and it just makes the whole process 100 times more enjoyable. And if you're enjoying it, you're more likely to stick at it. Companies don't fail because they run out of cash. Companies fail because founders give up.
Right, right. I really like the last part here. It's when you lose heart that, the companies lose. And, I think in the world of startups, right, when you're creating something, it's all about, determination and having your heart in it. And I think co-founders play an incredible role in that, right? Ultimately, it is a very emotional connection you have with the company. And so, yeah, I guess I'd love to move over into just, a few thoughts on EF and where it's headed. But before we get into that, just to, make things a bit more interesting here for the audience, we're going to do a lightning round. So we're going to ask a bunch of quick, rapid fire, simple, quick questions. And we'd love to, get like responses in a few words, maybe no more than 3 words or something in that direction. So we'll do three and then we'll go from there. So number one, fastest way to lose EF's interest in the first 5 minutes.
Um, I actually just don't think you can answer this one. As in, like, you can't know a person in 5 minutes.
Right, right.
So even if in the first 5 minutes I am like, I'm not interested, it's on me then to work out why this person is exceptional. And they may not be a right fit, but I always see that as it's on me to like See this person as an onion and peel away the layers.
Um, Most overrated trait investors chase in a first-time founder.
Badges.
Badges. I like that. One piece of advice for founders looking to join EF.
Um, get to know someone from my team really well. If you like them, there's a good chance you're going to love the process.
Um, awesome. Some of the biggest regrets from EF in evaluating founders in not investing in places where we should have.
Um, I mean, we've invested in a lot of places. We've run EF in almost 8 different cities around the world. I would love to do more consumer investing. One of our biggest companies, Clio, is a consumer company. They're making almost $400 million a year revenue and are profitable. But yeah, we don't invest in as many consumer founders as I would like.
Awesome. Cool. I guess we have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. So we'll go to that and then we'll close off with, just a few questions on EF and where, you see sort of EF going with the industry and how things are evolving. So this is a really interesting question. Uh, so this is a question from Samira. She's asking, Alice wrote a Medium article 12 years ago called Stop Building a Startup, Build a Product. 12 years later, do you still believe that, or has the pre-seed landscape changed so much that founders now need to build both at the same time?
Gosh, you've been through the archives. So the point of this article was that it's very easy to get caught up in startup creation. You're thinking about the company's name, you're thinking about your offices, you're thinking about um, what title you and your co-founder have, you're thinking about who you're hiring, and really the only thing that matters is whether you have a product that people love or not. So if anything, I think where we are now actually just doubles down on this idea that it has never been easier to build, and so you should be building. One of the shifts we're seeing is when moving from, previously we'd say to people, okay, if you want to get building, the first thing you need to do is really great customer discovery and then customer development, and then get building. And actually now the cost of building is so low and the speed is so quick that you can take a reasonably fully fledged product to customers very early on. The only thing I would counsel though is that just because you've built it does not mean it's any more valuable than it was, before it was that easy to build. And so really, really strong and effective customer development where you're genuinely truth seeking. Customer development is a truth seeking process where you're bringing your hypotheses about what the future looks like, about what this product should look like to the customer. And then you're genuinely trying to work out what is their belief about what your product could do for them. And that doesn't necessarily mean, listening directly to what they say. It's about trying to understand their motivations and their intentions. What they say may not actually be an accurate indication of that.
Awesome. Well, we have so many great questions from the audience. I'll take one more before we move over into the last part here. So we have a question from uh, um, we have a question from Brian around, obviously given that EF has had a very large portfolio of investments, or is there data around companies being more successful that have co-founders or being, founder splits or, conflict leading to a lower success rate, or, what does the data say from EF's like, hundreds of investments over the years?
Um, EF is an unusual process. So, what our data shows is that teams of two are the ones that are most likely to succeed at every stage. We discourage any teams larger than two. The complexity, the relationship complexity, when you're very, very early stage and you may not necessarily have a fixed idea, even by adding one person extra, it can completely change the dynamics. Um, adding a third co-founder is also the most expensive decision you'll make. Having a co-founder is the most expensive decision you'll make, but you are literally cutting your long-term upside significantly by bringing on that third co-founder. And so we always challenge that very deeply. So teams of two perform best. Sole founders have very binary outcomes. Sole founders either end up being the most successful in our portfolio, or the majority of them can't even raise. There is still, it's beginning to change, there is still a strong bias against sole founders. Investors, some VCs won't even meet them to take meetings. I think this is going to change, but largely what they're looking for is followership. You know, can you get anyone to come on board with your vision? And if you can't, it's not necessarily a good indicator.
Right on. Awesome. I think we're approaching time here. Alice, great stuff. Really enjoyed sort of some of the insights here. I guess a couple of things before we wrap up. One area that I wanted to touch for the audience and also out of our own curiosity is what's next for EF. We noticed that EF raised a large round recently, and it seems like there is this concept of like having an evergreen source of financing for startups, right? I guess two specific questions around that. In terms of like the batches you're doing, in terms of the, capital that's being deployed, is the goal or the ambition to sort of scale that, or, are you sort of, what's next on that front? Are there
Sure.
changes coming up?
So we recently raised $200 million for EF, and we're structured, as you say, as a company rather than as a fund. Um, I'm very interested in like new formats, different ways to do EF. So, the core of EF is helping you work out who you want to work with, what you want to work on, and how to move as fast as possible. We recently released a product called The Bridge, which is a residency in San Francisco. It's currently focused on Europeans, young Europeans. We have 50 of them in a house together, building their teams and then staying in San Francisco to raise their money. We just finished the first one. It is super intense. It is incredibly hard work meets good fun, meets an amazing community. So yeah, new ways to experience the kind of EF experience is definitely one of my priorities right now.
Awesome. And this is a great example of a different way of experiencing EF. And then what's I think this is one of the questions in the audience, and this is also something I had in mind. I think it'd be really incredible to sort of for the audience and for the group here to hear about what's the ambition for EF. What does success look like in 10 years from today? More from a zoomed out perspective. If everything goes as you'd hope, and if everything works out really nicely. What would the world look like with EF in 10 years?
So one of our strong beliefs is that the world is still missing out on some of its best potential founders. They get sucked into the status quo. They get sucked into, jobs, academia, the life that many of us, if you were brought up outside of Silicon Valley, were expected to lead. And it's beginning to change, but we still see so many incredible people that get trapped in these kind of, these mimetic career paths that are based on what the world around them is telling them to do rather than what they actually want to do. In 10 years' time, I would love to see a world enabled by EF that helps the most exceptional, high potential founders to take the leap, and then very, very quickly be able to form a world class company with somebody that they feel exceptionally lucky to be partnered with. So I think we are on that path, and we've made a great dent over the last decade, and I'm looking forward to making more of a dent over the next one.
Awesome. And then last thing here, before we thank everyone and call it a session. For from in terms of like how the program is structured and everything, it's obviously focused on specific geographies, the US, California for fundraising and for the cohort and for the demo day and for the program, which makes perfect sense. And then the recruitment focus is Europe. um this is also one of the questions in the chat. Does ZF accept founders from other parts of the world, Africa, Asia, you know Australasia, and so on? And what does that sort of geographic roadmap look like?
Yeah, we accept founders from anywhere. You can apply to one of our hubs in Bangalore, London, or San Francisco, and we can help you with the visa process as well.
Awesome. Cool. Alice, this has been a great session. We really enjoyed, learning about EF and hopefully it's been useful for our audience of founders that are actively raising or, sort of somewhere in that journey in and around fundraising. We'll also post this live on our website and in, different parts of our digital ecosystem. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much, Alice, for being with us and for,
For
being
having me.
patient with us as we powered through electricity outages in the middle of a thunderstorm. Thank you so much, everyone.
No worries. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.